Renowned hedge fund manager Stan Druckenmiller sounding the alarm on our government's debt and spending expenses, warning on this program yesterday that a bond crisis could soon be at hand.
You know, the bond market is a funny thing. In Greece, the bond market was perfectly fine until February of 2010. Not moving, not doing anything, and then in 2 weeks, it was over. But if we don't deal with it in the next 4 or 5 years, the same thing's going to happen. We're going to wake up, interest rates are going to explode, and the next generation, they're going to have a very, very tough time, and it's so unfair.
No surprise, our Rick Santelli agrees with Druckenmiller, but Dean Baker of the Center for Economic and Policy Research is not worried. He says this isn't and will not be Greece. Dean, where do you think Druckenmiller is going wrong then?
Well, we've been hearing these things for about 4 years now, and I'm still waiting. Look, there are three big differences between the United States and Greece. First, we're a huge diversified economy, not a little country dependent on tourism. Secondly, people in the U.S. pay their taxes. You know, Greece had a deficit of about 7% of GDP. That would be over $1 trillion a year in the United States before the collapse. We have a very different story. The third is, huge difference, we have our own currency. Greece is like Arkansas. The reason why its interest rates suddenly went through the roof, it'd be like Arkansas. Everyone thought the U.S. government was going to back up its debt, and then we said, hey, guess what? We're not. If you can't tell the difference between the U.S. and Greece, you probably have your winter vacations in Point Barrow, Alaska.
Yeah, well, you know what, though? I think the point that he was trying to make in that was the fact that if we don't do something about this, the market is going to figure out that we have a credit problem in this country. And he basically said, but he basically said when you normalize interest rates, and right now they're really manipulated. I mean, the Fed's keeping rates where they are, but if you normalize interest rates, you're talking about $500 billion going out the door every year just on interest expense. That's just paying the interest on the debt. You think that's sustainable?
That's a lower interest expense than what we had relative to our economy in the early 90s. We could live with that, and that's not for many years out. We lived with it in the early 90s, the economy did great in that decade.
Rick, what do you think?
I think that, you know, we have so many ostriches, I don't think we have enough sand to cover their full heads. You know, whether it's Mr. Druckenmiller or Barron's this week, listen, it's pretty clear. Dean is right. We aren't Greece, but we can be. The math is the same, at least on its trajectory. And he's hit all the highlights of why we bury our head in the sand. We're the reserve currency. He's right. We pay our taxes. He's right, except for not everybody is required to pay federal taxes. I won't argue that point. According to the Greek debt clock, every citizen's responsible for about $41,000. According to the U.S. debt clock, every citizen's responsible for about $50,000. According to Barron's, if you look at public debt, okay, and I understand we're not counting underfunded liabilities, which even Bill Gross said in 2011 makes our problem way worse than Greece. We're at about 75% of GDP. They're at about 150%. But the trajectory at current rate means in about 22 years, we will be them. And I also agree with Mr. Dean
That's
there.
A little wacky trajectory there, buddy.
Dean said 4 years.
What's wacky about it? Wait, Rick, Dean's calling you wacky.
I said the trajectory is wacky.
It's a wacky trajectory.
Huge debt, huge rises in debt. We never do anything.
I hope he lives 22 years to tell his grandkids they're wacky when they're chasing them.
Well, my grandkids will tell me I'm wacky if we follow the prescription of cutting the deficit and raising the unemployment rate even higher and putting their parents out of work.
Right.
They aren't going to be happy about that.
In Greece, we can afford to pay to put people to work as opposed to people working in the private sector carrying their own load.
The private sector is not hiring them.
Just look at the infrastructure bank they're proposing. It's Freddie and Fannie. They're proposing creating another Freddie and Fannie. And what's worse, Dean, it's going to be off balance sheet like Wall Street was doing in 2007.
You might not be old enough, but we've actually had very good success with infrastructure. In the New Deal, they built lots of infrastructure that we're still using today, 75 years later. It's not all great, but a lot of it was very effective and helped build up the economy. That's what we need to do again.
You're right.
The private sector's not hiring these people.
You're exactly right, and that's why the Depression wouldn't have ended if it wasn't for the war. I say read Amity Schleye's version of what happened in the Depression.
I've read her stuff. It's hard to take seriously, frankly, because the reality is that
because it doesn't fit the ideologue plan you're trying to sell us.
Look, you know, if you're telling me that somehow you can create jobs and have growth with war, but if we spend money on infrastructure, that doesn't create jobs and have growth. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Do you think I have any problem cutting the Defense Department? Depression?
No, you're telling me we
baby.
got out of the Depression because of World War II. So I'm saying instead of spending the money fighting a war, let's spend the money on infrastructure and building up the economy. If war will create jobs, so will infrastructure.
Okay, then let's put out the infrastructure to bidding, cut out all unions that basically put the guy in power, and let's start there. You want to play it that way?
We're a democratic country. We can't get out unions. Might not like them. Go tell people shouldn't join them. But sorry, we're a democratic country. People have the right to organize.
All that stuff is shovel ready. Didn't we see this movie in 2009 when I ran?
We didn't need it shovel ready, as it turned out. We had a lot longer recession than they were betting on. Not that I was betting on. I knew it was going to be a long time. But we didn't need it shovel ready.
Building bridges and building Hoover Dam. Just get all these people to get teaspoons and pay them $20 an hour to move the sand from L.A. to New York and then back again.
Well, frankly, that would be better than being unemployed.
Well, wait a second.
So, Dean, if you think that's the answer, who you calling wacky?
It's not my top answer, buddy. I'm saying if you're not going to let me do something productive, I would rather pay them to move sand from one part of the country to another than be unemployed. We want the government to quit controlling the treasury market, quit controlling the equity market, and quit controlling the economy. I think you got quite a conspiracy theory here, buddy.
It's not a conspiracy. I work at the markets every day, Dean. The markets are shot. You don't even get a signal like Stan said. Interest rates would be at 6%. Then all this would stop.
What about,
I've been hearing this for 4 years.
Dean, are you saying we should not worry about the debt and it should not be a priority in terms of slowing down the spending?
I'm saying that as clearly as I possibly can.
Yeah,
we had a very low deficit before we went into it. Very easily, I just did. We had a very small deficit going into this. It's totally responsible. It's irresponsible to put people out of work when we could employ them if the government would simply take the steps to do that. That's incredibly irresponsible. You want to talk about irresponsible? How come you folks weren't talking about the housing bubble in 2004, 5, and 6?
I was.
Going to ever more dangerous levels.
Greenspan was. You were ignoring them then the way you're ignoring them
Greenspan
today.
was saying there was no bubble. I could give you one verse on that.
What was Barney Frank saying?
Greenspan was saying he wasn't going to pop it, but he recognized it was developing. It wasn't his job to pop it.
No, it was his job to pop it. There was nothing more important than Al Greenspan could have done than to pop that bubble.
We're going off on a tangent. As fun and wonderful as this conversation has been, we seem to be going off on a tangent. But interesting take there that you don't think that cutting spending should be a priority at all right now, Dean.
Zero.
Even though there are expectations that the $16.5 trillion debt is going to $22 trillion very quickly in the next few years.
Yeah, and that's going to take us back to our interest payments relative to our size economy will still be lower than they were in the early 90s, and that didn't prevent a decade of very strong growth.
Trillions of dollars of treasuries, Dean.
Okay, other people don't have to hold those treasuries. Other people are holding those treasuries voluntarily. The Fed has trillions, and private investors have trillions more.
We gotta go. We gotta go, guys. Thank you.
Stop the program.
Very important points that you both make. We'll see you soon. We appreciate it. Thanks so much, guys.